Captain Jake Morrison flexed his fingers inside the medical cast that encased his right arm from wrist to elbow, the synthetic material humming softly as its microprocessors monitored bone density and tissue regeneration. 3 weeks since his encounter with Centauri pirates, and the damn thing still itched like hell. The cargo manifest in his left hand showed another routine delivery to Kepler 7, a trading station that orbited the gas giant Cronus like a metal tumor on an otherwise beautiful world. The docking bay pressurization cycle completed with its usual mechanical sigh, and Jake stepped into the controlled chaos of Level 5. Kepler 7 served as neutral ground for dozens of species, from the insectoid Thrax traders with their clicking mandibles to the gaseous nebulans who communicated through color shifts in their containment suits. The air recycling systems worked overtime to accommodate the atmospheric preferences of beings whose home worlds ranged from Arctic wastelands to molten hellscapes. Jake's destination was the shipping office on Level 7, but a commotion in the central plaza caught his attention. A crowd had gathered in a rough circle, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds, colors, and pheromone bursts that the station's translation matrix could barely process. At the center of the disturbance, a woman knelt on the metal deck plates while a massive figure loomed over her. The woman was unmistakably humanoid, though her elegantly pointed ears marked her as non-terrestrial. Her dark hair fell forward to hide her face, but Jake could see her shoulders trembling. The male standing above her was clearly from the same species, but where she appeared delicate and graceful, he was built like a walking tank. Muscles rippled beneath skin that had an almost metallic sheen, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the deck plates vibrate. Zara has failed in her primary function, the male announced to the gathered crowd. 3 breeding cycles, and still no offspring. The genetic compatibility scanners confirm the flaw lies with her, not with me. Jake felt his stomach turn. He'd heard about species where reproduction was treated as a public matter, but witnessing it firsthand was different. The woman, Zara, kept her head down as the male continued his humiliation. Perhaps Korvac should trade for a more fertile mate, someone called from the crowd, prompting laughter from several spectators. Korvac. Jake filed the name away as he watched the scene unfold. The massive alien reached down and grabbed Zara's chin, forcing her to look up at him. Jake caught a glimpse of silver-flecked eyes before Korvac backhanded her across the face hard enough to send her sprawling. "You will remember your place," Korvac growled. "And perhaps if you show proper submission, I may allow you to remain in my household as a servant rather than casting you out to starve." Jake had seen enough. He pushed through the crowd, his cast making him clumsy as he tried to navigate between various alien anatomies. "Hey," he called out. "That's enough." The plaza fell silent. Dozens of alien faces turned toward him with expressions ranging from curiosity to alarm. Korvac straightened to his full height, which put him at nearly 8 feet tall, and fixed Jake with a stare that could have melted steel. "The human speaks," Korvac said, his voice carrying dangerous amusement. "Tell me, small one, do you object to how I discipline my property?" "She's not property," Jake replied before his brain could catch up with his mouth. "She's a person." The crowd's reaction was immediate and varied. Some species buzzed or clicked with what might have been approval, while others made sounds that the translation matrix interpreted as warnings. Korvac's expression shifted from amusement to something much more dangerous. Property. Person. These are semantic distinctions that matter little to warriors. Korvac stepped closer, his footsteps making the deck plates ring like bells. But perhaps the human wishes to make a more substantial objection? Jake realized he'd walked into something he didn't understand. The crowd was pressing closer, but instead of the chaos he'd expected, they were forming what looked suspiciously like an organized circle. Zara had struggled to her feet and was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. "Look, I'm not looking for trouble," Jake said, raising his good hand. "Where I come from, we just think people should treat each other with basic respect." "Basic respect," Korvac repeated the words as if tasting something foul. "The human thinks warriors should show respect to failures. The human thinks strength should bow to weakness." His smile revealed teeth that had been filed to points. Perhaps the human would like to demonstrate this philosophy in combat. The crowd made excited noises. Jake felt his heart rate spike as he realized what was happening. Combat? Listen, I'm just a cargo hauler. I'm not a fighter. All males are fighters, Korvac declared. Some are simply better at it than others. I challenge you, human, for the insult you have given me by questioning my authority over my mate. I didn't insult anyone. I was being polite. Politeness, Korvac spat. The weapon of the weak. You have shown interest in my property, questioned my dominance, and suggested that your customs are superior to mine. In Valerian culture, these are acts of war. Jake looked around desperately. The crowd was definitely forming a combat circle now, with various species taking what appeared to be traditional positions. Some were already making bets, judging by the rapid exchange of credits and data chips. What exactly are you challenging me to? Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew. Trial by combat. Ancient law, recognized by the Galactic Compact. Winner takes all. Korvac's grin widened. If you defeat me, you claim Zara as your prize. If I defeat you, I gain the right to execute you slowly as an example to others who would interfere with Valerian justice. Jake stared at him. Those seem like pretty uneven stakes. You began this when you chose to involve yourself, Korvac replied. Honor demands satisfaction. Will you fight, or will you kneel and beg forgiveness like the coward you appear to be? Jake looked at Zara, who was watching the exchange with something that might have been hope flickering in her eyes. Then he looked at his cast, at the crowd of bloodthirsty aliens, and at Korvac's massive frame. Every rational cell in his brain was screaming at him to apologize, pay whatever fine was required, and get the hell off this station. Instead, he heard himself saying, all right. But I want to know the rules first. The crowd erupted in excited chatter. Korvac's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. The rules are simple, human. We fight until one of us can no longer continue. No weapons beyond what our bodies provide, no outside assistance, no mercy. Korvac rolled his massive shoulders. And no medical intervention until the combat is concluded. Jake felt the weight of his cast and wondered if he'd just signed his own death warrant. And if I win, what happens to her? He nodded toward Zara. She becomes yours, as is proper. Though I suspect that question is academic. Korvac turned to address the crowd. Let the arena be prepared. Let word be sent that Korvac of the Crimson Moon faces a human in trial by combat. As the crowd began to disperse to make preparations, Jake found himself standing alone with Zara. She approached him cautiously, her pointed ears twitching with what he was learning to recognize as nervousness. You did not have to do this, she said softly. Korvac has never lost a challenge. Yeah, well, Jake flexed his fingers inside the cast again, I've got a broken arm and apparently no sense of self-preservation. How bad could it be? Zara's expression suggested it could be very, very bad indeed. But for the first time since he'd seen her kneeling in the plaza, she almost smiled. Perhaps the gods favor fools and heroes equally, she said. Let's hope so, Jake replied, because I'm definitely at least one of those things. The combat arena on level 2 had been hastily reconfigured for the unexpected match, its modular design allowing the maintenance crews to expand the fighting space and accommodate the growing crowd of spectators. Jake stood in what the arena staff cheerfully called the preparation chamber, which looked disturbingly similar to a morgue's holding area, complete with medical scanners and what appeared to be body preservation equipment. First time in ritual combat? Asked the arena technician, a spider-like arachnoid whose multiple eyes clicked and whirred as they focused on Jake's cast. We'll need to scan you for biological enhancements, concealed weapons, and next-of-kin information. Next-of-kin? Jake tried to keep his voice steady. Standard procedure. The arena provides burial services for a modest fee, though most species prefer traditional disposal methods. The technician's mandibles clicked in what might have been sympathy. Your opponent has requested that your remains be fed to the station's waste recyclers as a final insult. Jake decided he didn't want to think about that. What can you tell me about Valerian physiology? Korvac of the Crimson Moon. Impressive specimen. Genetic modifications include enhanced bone density, improved muscle fiber efficiency, and accelerated healing factors. Neural implants provide tactical analysis and pain management. Combat record shows 43 victories, 0 defeats. The technician paused. Would you like me to recommend a good chaplain? We have several on station who specialize in last-minute spiritual counseling. I'll pass, thanks. Jake examined the arena through the observation window. The circular space was roughly 50 meters in diameter, with walls that rose 20 meters to spectator galleries that were rapidly filling with aliens eager to see the human get pulverized. Energy barriers flickered around the combat zone, designed to contain the violence while providing perfect viewing angles for the audience. The betting displays showed odds of approximately 500 to 1 against him, which Jake found both insulting and oddly motivating. At least someone would make a fortune if he somehow managed to win. Korvac entered the arena to thunderous applause, his massive frame now clad in ceremonial armor that seemed designed more for intimidation than protection. The metallic plates were covered in Valerian script that the translation matrix informed Jake were the names of his previous victims. The armor left his arms bare, revealing muscles that looked like they'd been carved from stone by a sculptor with serious anger management issues. And in the opposite corner, the arena announcer's voice boomed through speakers that had been tuned to accommodate dozens of alien hearing ranges, representing the species Homo sapiens, Captain Jake Morrison of Earth. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some species cheered with what sounded like genuine enthusiasm, while others made noises that Jake's translator interpreted as variations of dead human walking. He stepped into the arena wearing his standard cargo hauler's uniform and his medical cast, feeling like he'd brought a spoon to a gunfight. Korvac saluted the crowd with both arms raised, revealing scars that crisscrossed his torso like a roadmap of violence. When he turned to face Jake, his smile was all teeth and bad intentions. I have been thinking about our conversation, human, Korvac called across the arena. When I am finished with you, I will make sure Zara understands exactly what happens to males who try to steal another warrior's property. Jake looked up at the spectator galleries and spotted Zara sitting in what appeared to be a section reserved for family members. Her face was pale, and her hands were pressed against her temples as if she had a headache. The neural link, Jake realized aloud. She can feel what you feel, can't she? Korvac's grin widened. Valerian mates share pain and pleasure through bioneural implants. Every blow I strike against you, she will experience as victory. Every moment of your suffering will be her joy. He flexed his massive hands. It is one of the many reasons she has never tried to leave me. The arena's combat systems activated with a harmonic tone that seemed to vibrate through Jake's bones. Energy barriers snapped into full power, sealing them inside the ring. Holographic displays around the arena began showing vital signs, combat statistics, and what looked like a running commentary in several alien languages. Combat may commence when both participants signal readiness, the announcer declared. Korvac immediately raised his right fist, the universal gesture for acceptance. Jake looked at his own cast, flexed his good arm, and wondered if there was any scenario where this ended with him still breathing. You know what? He said to himself. I survived the Battle of Phobos Station. I can survive one oversized alien with anger issues. Jake raised his left fist. The crowd erupted as the combat officially began. Korvac wasted no time, charging across the arena with a speed that seemed impossible for someone his size. Jake barely managed to throw himself sideways, rolling away from a punch that cratered the arena floor where he'd been standing. Rule number 1 of human military tactics, Jake muttered as he scrambled to his feet, when facing superior force, don't be where they expect you to be. Korvac spun toward him with fluid grace, his next attack a sweeping kick that Jake ducked under by millimeters. The crowd was on its feet now, various species making excited noises as the human managed to avoid the first few exchanges. "You run well for prey," Korvac taunted. "But you cannot run forever." "Who's running?" Jake feinted left, then dove right as Korvac committed to an attack. "I'm strategically repositioning." The humor wasn't lost on the crowd, though Jake suspected they were laughing at him rather than with him. But every second he stayed mobile was another second to study his opponent's patterns. Korvac was fast and strong, but he was also accustomed to overwhelming opponents quickly. His attacks were powerful but straightforward, designed to end fights against opponents who would try to match strength with strength. Jake had no intention of playing that game. When Korvac's next charge came, Jake did something the Valerian warrior clearly hadn't expected. He moved toward the attack instead of away from it, sliding under Korvac's outstretched arms and coming up behind him. Jake's cast, heavy with medical technology, connected with the back of Korvac's knee with a satisfying crack. The massive alien stumbled, and for the first time since the fight began, the crowd made surprised noises instead of bloodthirsty ones. "Did that hurt?" Jake asked conversationally. "Because I've got plenty more where that came from." Korvac whirled around, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been confusion. "Coward. Fight with honor." "Honor doesn't pay the bills," Jake replied, then had to throw himself into another role as Korvac's fist whistled through the space where his head had been. The arena's energy barrier sparked as Korvac's punch impacted them, and Jake realized something important. The arena's safety systems were designed to contain the combat, but they also provided opportunities for creative tactics. The walls weren't just barriers, they were tools. Jake began moving in patterns that forced Korvac to chase him around the arena's perimeter, using the curved walls to help redirect his momentum and the energy barriers to limit his opponent's angles of attack. It was exhausting work, but Jake had spent 3 years in the Earth-Mars conflicts learning to survive against superior firepower through superior thinking. "Stand still and die like a warrior," Korvac roared. "Counteroffer," Jake panted as he vaulted over a low barrier. "How about you slow down and lose like a gentleman?" The crowd was getting more animated by the minute. What had started as an execution was turning into something resembling an actual fight, and Jake could hear the betting odds changing as some spectators began to wonder if the human might actually have a chance. In the gallery above, Zara was gripping the rail with white knuckles, her face a mask of concentration and pain. Jake realized she was experiencing every impact, every moment of Korvac's growing frustration. But unlike her husband, she didn't look angry. She looked hopeful. Korvac's next attack came with desperate fury, a combination of punches and kicks that would have turned Jake into paste if any of them had connected. But desperation made him sloppy, and Jake managed to land 2 more solid hits with his cast, once against Korvac's ribs, and once against his temple. The second impact made Korvac stagger, and Jake saw something in the alien's eyes that he hadn't seen before: doubt. "You know what the difference is between humans and Valerians?" Jake asked as they circled each other warily. "Humans are weak," Korvac snarled. "Humans are stubborn," Jake corrected. "We're too stupid to know when we're beaten." As if to prove his point, Jake charged forward with his cast raised like a club, ready to turn his medical equipment into a weapon of war. Jake's charge caught Korvac off guard for perhaps the first time in his combat career. The Valerian warrior had spent decades facing opponents who either tried to match his strength or fled from it, but Jake was doing neither. Instead, he was treating the fight like an engineering problem that required creative solutions and a willingness to use every available resource. The cast connected with Korvac's solar plexus with enough force to double the massive alien over, but Jake wasn't finished. Years of military training had taught him that when you found an opening, you exploited it completely. He brought his knee up toward Korvac's chin, but the Valerian's enhanced reflexes kicked in just in time to turn what should have been a fight-ending blow into a glancing strike. Still, it was enough to send Korvac stumbling backward, blood streaming from his nose for the first time in the fight. The crowd's reaction was electric, with several species making noises that Jake's translator interpreted as variations of impossible and unprecedented upset. First blood to the human, the arena announcer proclaimed with obvious excitement. Ladies, gentlemen, and various other classifications of sentient beings, we may be witnessing history. Korvac wiped the blood from his face and stared at it with the expression of someone who just discovered that gravity worked backward. You actually hurt me. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises, Jake panted, trying not to let on how much that brief exchange had cost him. His ribs ached, his cast felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and he was pretty sure he'd pulled something in his back. But Korvac looked rattled, and that was worth every ounce of pain. The Valerian warrior's entire demeanor shifted. Gone was the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced a real challenge. In its place was something Jake recognized from his military days, the focused intensity of a professional soldier who'd realized his enemy was more dangerous than anticipated. I underestimated you, human, Korvac said, settling into a combat stance that looked considerably more serious than his earlier posturing. I will not make that mistake again. Too bad, Jake replied, wiping sweat from his eyes. I was hoping to coast on underestimation for at least another round. Korvac's next attack was completely different from his earlier brute force approach. Instead of overwhelming power, he used precise, calculated strikes designed to probe Jake's defenses and exploit weaknesses. It was like fighting a different person entirely, and Jake quickly realized that he'd made a potentially fatal error. He'd provoked Korvac into taking him seriously. The next few minutes were a brutal dance of violence and survival. Jake's military training kept him alive, but barely. Every block sent shockwaves through his bones, every dodge came a fraction of a second closer to failure, and his cast, which had been his primary weapon, was starting to crack under the repeated impacts. In the spectator gallery, Zara was experiencing every moment of the fight through her neural link with Korvac. But something strange was happening. Instead of sharing in her husband's confidence and bloodlust, she was feeling something else entirely through the connection, respect for the human who refused to surrender, and growing concern about Korvac's increasingly Jake's charge caught Korvac off guard for perhaps the first time in his combat career. The Valerian warrior had spent decades facing opponents who either tried to match his strength or fled from it, but Jake was doing neither. Instead, he was treating the fight like an engineering problem that required creative solutions and a willingness to use every available resource. The cast connected with Korvac's solar plexus with enough force to double the massive alien over, but Jake wasn't finished. Years of military training had taught him that when you found an opening, you exploited it completely. He brought his knee up toward Korvac's chin, but the Valerian's enhanced reflexes kicked in just in time to turn what should have been a fight-ending blow into a glancing strike. Still, it was enough to send Korvac stumbling backward, blood streaming from his nose for the first time in the fight. The crowd's reaction was electric, with several species making noises that Jake's translator interpreted as variations of impossible and unprecedented upset. First blood to the human, the arena announcer proclaimed with obvious excitement. Ladies, gentlemen, and various other classifications of sentient beings, we may be witnessing history. Korvac wiped the blood from his face and stared at it with the expression of someone who just discovered that gravity worked backward. You actually hurt me. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises, Jake panted, trying not to let on how much that brief exchange had cost him. His ribs ached, his cast felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and he was pretty sure he'd pulled something in his back. But Korvac looked rattled, and that was worth every ounce of pain. The Valerian warrior's entire demeanor shifted. Gone was the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced a real challenge. In its place was something Jake recognized from his military days, the focused intensity of a professional soldier who'd realized his enemy was more dangerous than anticipated. I underestimated you, human, Korvac said, settling into a combat stance that looked considerably more serious than his earlier posturing. I will not make that mistake again. Too bad, Jake replied, wiping sweat from his eyes. I was hoping to coast on underestimation for at least another round. Korvac's next attack was completely different from his earlier brute force approach. Instead of overwhelming power, he used precise, calculated strikes designed to probe Jake's defenses and exploit weaknesses. It was like fighting a different person entirely, and Jake quickly realized that he'd made a potentially fatal error. He'd provoked Korvac into taking him seriously. The next few minutes were a brutal dance of violence and survival. Jake's military training kept him alive, but barely. Every block sent shockwaves through his bones, every dodge came a fraction of a second closer to failure, and his cast, which had been his primary weapon, was starting to crack under the repeated impacts. In the spectator gallery, Zara was experiencing every moment of the fight through her neural link with Korvac. But something strange was happening. Instead of sharing in her husband's confidence and bloodlust, she was feeling something else entirely through the connection: respect for the human who refused to surrender, and growing concern about Korvac's increasingly desperate tactics. "He fights with honor," she whispered to herself, watching Jake take a crushing blow to the ribs but immediately counter with a strike that made Korvac grunt with pain. Even when outmatched, he does not beg or flee. Below in the arena, Jake was running out of options. His cast was now held together by little more than medical tape and stubborn determination, and Korvac had adapted to his unconventional fighting style. Worse, the Valerian's enhanced healing factors were already working to repair the damage Jake had inflicted, while his own injuries continued to accumulate. "Getting tired, human?" Korvac taunted as Jake barely avoided a strike that would have caved in his skull. "Ready to kneel and beg for mercy?" "Actually," Jake gasped, "I was wondering if you offer a frequent fighter discount. This is exhausting work." The joke earned him a few clicks of alien laughter, but Jake wasn't performing for the crowd anymore. He was buying time, studying the arena's systems while his conscious mind focused on survival. The energy barriers weren't just containment fields, they were connected to the station's main power grid. The gravity generators weren't just environmental controls. They were adjustable systems designed to accommodate different species' physiological needs. And Jake had spent his entire adult life working with spacecraft systems that were far more advanced than anything this arena contained. "You know what your problem is, Korvac?" Jake said as he dodged another attack. "You think this is just a fight. But for me, this is a workplace safety inspection." "What are you babbling about, human?" Jake smiled as his cast finally gave up entirely, the medical technology sparking and crackling as its circuits overloaded. But instead of discarding the broken equipment, he held onto it, waiting for the right moment. That moment came when Korvac committed to a finishing move, a devastating combination that would have pulverized any normal opponent. But Jake wasn't trying to be a normal opponent anymore. He was being an engineer. As Korvac's attack reached its peak, Jake jammed the sparking remnants of his medical cast directly into the arena's primary power coupling, the one that regulated the gravity generators and energy barriers. The result was spectacular. Emergency klaxons blared as the arena's gravity field fluctuated wildly. The medical bay aboard Jake's cargo hauler, Persistence, was never designed to accommodate alien physiology, but 6 months of modifications had transformed it into something approaching a proper interspecies medical facility. Jake sat on the examination table while Dr. Sarah Chen, the ship's AI, projected her holographic form to conduct his monthly checkup. "Your bone density has increased by 12% since you started the enhanced exercise regimen," Dr. Chen reported, her data streams flickering with satisfaction. "Though I still maintain that using Valerian combat techniques for physical therapy is unnecessarily dramatic." "It works," Jake replied, flexing his right arm, which had fully healed from the break he'd sustained months earlier. "Besides, Zara says I need to maintain my warrior status if we're going to keep working the outer colonies." "Speaking of Zara, Dar." Chen's expression shifted to something approaching concern. Her latest neural scan shows interesting developments. The trauma bonding with her previous mate appears to be completely severed, but she's developing new neural pathways that I don't have in any medical database. Jake looked through the medical bay's viewport at the navigation station, where Zara was plotting their next jump with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Her pointed ears twitched as she worked, responding to the subtle vibrations that indicated optimal engine performance, and her fingers moved across the control interfaces with the precision of someone who'd found their calling among the stars. "She's adapting," Jake said simply. "Valerians are more flexible than their culture admits. When you remove the artificial restrictions, they're incredibly capable." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd accidentally acquired what Valerian law considered a war prize, only to discover that Zara was a natural pilot with an intuitive understanding of spacecraft systems that surpassed his own engineering training. What had started as an obligation to provide protection had evolved into a partnership that made both of them better at their respective jobs. Jump calculations complete, Zara's voice came through the intercom, carrying the musical harmonics that Jake had learned to associate with her satisfaction. "We're clear for translation to the Kepler-9 system whenever you're ready." "On my way," Jake replied, then turned back to Dr. Chin. "How long until we reach the colony?" 18 hours at standard transit speed. Though I should remind you that Kepler-9 is still technically disputed territory. The Colonial Authority has been having difficulties with raiders. Jake smiled as he headed for the bridge. "Good thing we've got a reputation for handling difficult situations." That reputation had grown considerably since the incident on Kepler-7. Word of the human cargo hauler who defeated a Valerian champion in ritual combat had spread throughout the outer colonies, bringing both opportunities and challenges. Some potential clients hired them specifically because they wanted escorts who could handle themselves in a fight. Others challenged Jake to prove the stories weren't exaggerated. So far, Jake had managed to avoid any more formal duels, though there had been several informal disagreements that Zara diplomatically described as cultural learning experiences. "Status report," Jake said as he entered the bridge. Zara swiveled in the pilot's chair, her expression shifting from professional concentration to the warm smile she reserved for him alone. "All systems nominal, cargo secure, and I've identified 3 optimal approach vectors to avoid the pirate patrol routes." 3. The cautious approach, the efficient approach, and the approach that sends a message to anyone watching our sensor signature that we're not to be trifled with. Her ears twitched with amusement. "I thought you might prefer option 3. Jake settled into the captain's chair, noting how naturally they'd fallen into their respective roles. Zara handled navigation and ship operations with the instinctive skill of someone born to work in 3 dimensions, while Jake focused on the business side of their partnership and the inevitable problem-solving that came with working the frontier. "Option 3 it is," he decided. "What's our cargo this run?" "Medical supplies and emergency rations for the Kepler-9 Agricultural Collective, plus a sealed container from the Colonial Authority that they've marked as sensitive diplomatic materials." Zara's expression suggested she had opinions about mysterious government cargo, but she'd learned not to ask questions that clients didn't want answered. "Diplomatic materials usually means either bribes or weapons," Jake observed. "Or both. The Colonial Authority has been trying to negotiate with the raider clans for months without success. Perhaps they've decided to try a more direct approach." Jake studied the navigation display, noting the patrol routes that Zara had marked in red. The raider problem in the outer colonies was getting worse, with organized fleets targeting supply convoys and isolated settlements. The Colonial Authority's security forces were spread too thin to provide adequate protection, and private military contractors were too expensive for most colonial governments. "You know," Jake said thoughtfully, "we might be able to help with more than just cargo delivery." Zara's ears perked up with interest. "What are you thinking?" "The raiders avoid Valerian ships because they know the reputation of your people's warriors. But they've been targeting human cargo haulers because they assume we're soft targets." Jake pulled up the tactical display. "What if we offered convoy escort services? Using your reputation as the human who defeated Korvac in combat?" Zara's smile widened. "That could work. Though it would mean more fighting. Maybe. Or maybe just the threat of fighting would be enough." Jake looked at her carefully. "How do you feel about that? About using your warrior heritage for something other than survival?" Zara was quiet for a moment, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the control console. 6 months ago, I was property. My strength existed only to serve another's will, my intelligence was considered a flaw to be corrected, and my opinions were irrelevant. She met his eyes. Now I am a partner. My skills contribute to our success, my knowledge helps keep us alive, and my choices matter. If using those abilities to protect others serves our goals, then I see no conflict. Even if it means working with other Valerian ships. Word gets around. Eventually, someone from your home system is going to hear that you're operating independently. Let them hear, Zara said with quiet confidence. I am no longer the frightened exile who begged a human stranger for protection. I have found my place among the stars, and I will not surrender it to anyone. The determination in her voice reminded Jake of the moment he'd first seen her potential, when she'd started plotting courses with an intuitive understanding of hyperspace mechanics that impressed even the ship's AI. Zara had always possessed the strength and intelligence of a warrior, she'd simply needed the freedom to develop them on her own terms. All right then, Jake said, initiating the jump sequence. Let's go deliver some medical supplies and see if we can solve a pirate problem while we're at it. The hyperspace transition engaged with its characteristic reality-bending sensation, and the persistence slipped between dimensions toward the Kepler-9 system. On the navigation display, their course appeared as a line of light stretching toward their destination, but Jake knew the real journey was more complex than any computer could chart. 18 months ago, he'd been a solitary cargo hauler whose biggest concerns were mechanical failures and delivery schedules. Now he was part of a partnership that had evolved into something neither human nor Valerian culture had anticipated, a relationship built on mutual respect, complementary skills, and the kind of trust that only developed when people faced impossible odds together and discovered they were stronger as a team. Jake, Zara said softly as the hyperspace tunnel stabilized around them. Yeah. Thank you. For seeing who I could become instead of accepting who I was forced to be. Jake reached over and squeezed her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the best solutions to impossible problems come from refusing to accept that they're impossible. As the persistence carried them toward their next adventure, the stars wheeled overhead in patterns that spoke of infinite possibilities. And in the quiet hum of the ship's systems, two beings from different worlds had found something that transcended species and culture, a home among the stars, built not on tradition or obligation, but on the simple choice to care for each other's dreams. The cargo manifest listed their destination as a routine delivery run, but Jake suspected they were heading towards something much more significant. After all, he'd learned that the most important journeys rarely appeared on any official schedule. ETA 17 hours, 43 minutes to Kepler-9, Zara announced. Copy that, partner, Jake replied, settling back in his chair with a smile. Let's go see what kind of trouble we can solve this time. Behind them, hyperspace folded reality into impossible geometries, carrying them toward whatever challenges waited in the outer colonies. But after everything they'd faced together, Jake was confident they could handle whatever the galaxy threw at them. After all, they'd already proven that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships created the strongest foundations for the future.